The text today is from Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 to 35. Would you please open your Bibles? Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 to 35. So, my dear brothers and sisters, if you remember, we are, as I have been saying, we are in Matthew's Gospel on Sundays and Luke's Gospel on weekdays, but on Sundays, we are looking at Matthew's Gospel. Where are we? Always place the text in its context so that there is no confusion. We are in chapter 18. Remember, I told you chapter 18 is the fourth of the 5 discourses in the Matthew's Gospel, which is the community discourse, or the discourse on ethics. Really, what Matthew was trying to do was put together the teachings of Jesus on how a community should live ethically as a community in love. And that is the reason why these issues of forgiveness and love and winning over brothers and sisters is all put together. You'll remember that 3 Sundays ago, or 2 Sundays ago, we looked at the parable of the lost sheep. And I told you the whole purpose of that parable was how to win a brother back, leaving the 99, going after the one lost. As I said, that one lost required 2 slaps for being lost, really, because he willfully went out, endangering everybody else's life. And yet, the attitude is not to give him 2 slaps, but to go looking after him. And then last Sunday, we saw how Jesus was not giving us a 4-point program. If you remember, I was explaining this to you. It's not a 4-point program of how to conduct a trial with an errant brother, but the whole purpose was how to win over this brother. So the whole theme of love, forgiveness in the community, brought now together, held together by this last section of chapter 18. And with this, we close chapter 18 with the theme of forgiveness. Now, the issue of forgiveness really has been necessitated by Jesus to answer because of a question posed by St. Peter. If you know my views on St. Peter, I always call him the patron of spontaneous prayer. You look through the Bible and you'll see that every time Peter has very spontaneously opened his mouth, and I must say he's got into trouble to some degree or the other, where Jesus answers him or corrects him or whatever the case may be. I always call him impetuous Peter. He feels the necessity to say almost something on every occasion, and then again that sounds like a lot of people we know. I want to say something very briefly because I'm thinking of a couple of people in my head this morning when I was preparing this. There are people who shoot their mouth off, and they say the most silliest things, if not impolite sometimes. But if you look very carefully at their lives, most of them, not all of them, have very good hearts. It's just that there is no filter between the brain and the mouth. They're like little children. Nobody realized little children, whatever they think in their head, they say through their mouth. Parents are like running for cover, trying to cover their mouth before they say the most embarrassing thing. Sometimes we adults do the same thing. We have no filter between our brain and our mouth. We mean well, but we say the wrong thing. So don't always hold that kind of feeling of animosity. But on this occasion, Peter seemed to want to do something really good. He wanted to push himself to a new height. He had heard Jesus preach the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, 6, and 7. He had heard Jesus talk about giving more, loving more. Remember, I did the hypothesis with you, the 6 hypothesis. He had heard that call of Jesus towards ye dil mange mo. And now Peter thought to himself, well, we are talking about love, we are talking about forgiveness. And he says to Jesus, Lord, how often should I forgive my brother? Should I forgive him 7 times? What was Peter really looking for when he said this? He was anticipating Jesus to say, wow, Peter, wow, that's brilliant. Why am I saying this? Because rabbinical Judaism demanded that you forgive your brother 3 times or your sister. You have to forgive 3 times. And that was it. Then you were done. You didn't have to do anything. God bless that other person. Peter takes this to another level. He doesn't say 3. He says, Lord, should I forgive my brother 7 times? He doubles rabbinical Judaism, adds one more. 7, if you remember, for the Jews, is a perfect number. So he's given perfection. And as I often say, 7 sounds like heaven. I think Peter thought that this was like the best answer he could ever give Jesus. And Jesus says, no. No, Peter. That's not good enough. That's good, but not good enough. Yeah, I think the Lord says that to us very often when we come to him with certain things. He says, that's good, not good enough. And Jesus gives this preposterous number. You wonder why he came up with that. 70 times 7, 490 times. I always think to myself, if I start counting, okay, with this person I don't like 1, 2, 3. By the time I reach 100, I've forgotten, I'll have to start all over again. What was this? Why did Jesus hit Petrine generosity in favor of this new number of 490? Now, all of this sounds very nice practically. Forgive, 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 forgive. How does it work out in reality? Because I want to say this with you. Forgiveness is a very tedious job. Yeah? Please don't ever think it's a light thing. I don't like to make light of spiritual truths. A lot of, very often, maybe as clergy, we have been guilty of saying things to you, not that we don't practice it, we attempt to, but we say it to you, and I sometimes think we burden you. We burden you. Now, I'm not taking away the teaching of forgiveness. I'm admitting that it is a tedious task. So when Jesus tells us to forgive, and when I share this message of forgiveness, I am admitting with you that it is tedious. Yeah? Sometimes you almost want to throttle the other person. I'm thinking of somebody right now who I have to deal with on a daily basis. And yet every day you have to start again. You have to start again. So there was no magic in that number 70 times 7. But Jesus was therefore saying something. Now, to complement what he was saying, Jesus gave us a parable. And the teachings of Jesus, if you see and listen very carefully, are always fitted together with parables of great extremes. Yeah? Great extremes. He's always asking his disciples to give more. This is really the heart of Christian discipleship. The teaching of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, when he spoke of the principle of margus. Margus meaning more, to give more, love more, share more. In everything, we are called as Christians towards the more. Now, when you look at the parables of Jesus, you will see that they are grossly exaggerated. And I think this parable can be aptly called the parable of exaggerated forgiveness. And I'm saying this because I want you to let the exaggerations set in, not because God is exaggerating. This is who he is. It's because we cannot comprehend the exaggerations. We cannot comprehend. Don't misunderstand. God's forgiveness is unbound. The fact is we can't comprehend how massive that forgiveness is. So let's look, at the sake of understanding these exaggerations, let us look at the parable and examine it. What are we talking about? First, we are told that this one particular servant owed his master 10,000 talents. Now, to get a fair understanding of what a talent is not, I'm playing my guitar or I'm very good at singing songs and what have you. That's not what we are talking about. This man owed his master 10,000 talents. A talent was a measure of weight. It was roughly about 59 kilograms. And if a talent was in gold or silver, but now let's take the lower one. We don't know whether he owed his master silver or he owed his master gold. But let's assume that the debt was in silver. That means he owed his master 10,000 into 59 kilograms of silver. Let me give you a little bit of an understanding. So, one talent was equivalent to 15 years of labor. One talent was equivalent to 15 years of labor. In total, this servant owed his master 1,50,000 years of income, or let's put it this way, at least to make it sound a little better, 3,000 financial lifetimes, which means that you will have to live 3,000 times, work all your life 3,000 times in order to pay your master back the 10,000 talents. Which leads you to ask, what kind of stupid master is this? Who would give a servant such a ridiculous amount of money and trust him with it? But that is God our Father. You see, now you're going to get the point. This is who God our Father is. You may say, I would not give somebody, $100 if he is a shady guy. And we are all shady people. We are all shady people. To put it in spiritual terms, we all have sin. And God doesn't look at how shady we are or how sinful we are. He pours 10,000 talents, 3,000 financial lifetimes, 1,50,000 years of work. And he says, take. I trust you with it. I give it to you. Now you're going to get a sense of how loving and forgiving the Father is. On the other hand, let's look at who we are, you and I. And in a way, we are represented by that wicked servant. That wicked servant was owed by his colleague, as we are told, 100 denarii. A denarius, in single, a denarius was equivalent to just 1 day's wage. Okay, 1 day's wage, a denarius. And this man, he had a friend who owed him 100 denarius, which means that in 3 months' time, if he worked for him, the debt was paid. Okay, 300 days versus 300 financial lifetimes. God forgives us 300 financial lifetimes, and somebody owes us 300 days of labor. Compare the two amounts. Let those two amounts sink in. And what is really happening? The wicked servant is unable to forgive. He's not unable. He refuses to. Because his colleague begged him. He begged him. He said, please, I'm asking you, forgive me. Help me. I will pay you back. He says, I don't want my debt cancelled. And compare this to the servant who owed his master 10,000 talents. When he begged from his master, what did the master do? He didn't say, I'm going to give you time. Watch this. He said, I am clearing off your debt. I am clearing off 3,000 financial lifetimes. Go. The same man coming out of the room cannot, forget about cancelling the debt, cannot say, I'm giving you time. This is who we are. That is who God is, and that's what Jesus wants to show us. He wants to make that comparison so that we understand first what we have received. When we understand what we have received, then we must understand our duty of what comes next. If we don't understand the first, then this whole business of forgiveness becomes very murky in our minds. But when I understand that at the moment of my death, I will owe the Lord 3,000 financial lifetimes. Think about it. Now, I want to come to a more practical issue. Why is it that we don't forgive? Why is it that we can't forgive? It's not that we don't. Some do. Some simply say, I can't. And yes, I get it. Many of us in our hearts say, enough is enough. I've done this once, I've done this twice, I've done it 300 times, and enough is enough. I've forgiven this person, and everything has its limit. There you go, that's the reason. You see, we set limits. We're constantly setting limits. And Jesus is making a bigger point. In a way, he's also asking us to be vulnerable. And understandably so, because unless you are vulnerable to some degree, and I'm going to correct myself on this entirely, unless you're vulnerable to some degree, you can't forgive. In fact, if you want a punishment from somebody else, you're not even asking for forgiveness. Those who seek punishment, when a couple comes very often to me and says, Father, help me with my... one actually wants me to punish the other. You can see it. They don't choose to forgive. They want a certain punishment. And why? Because vengeance stands in the way. I want my pound of flesh, Father. For all the misery I've been put through, I want my pound of flesh. So we find it very difficult to say enough is enough. What is Jesus asking us to understand? He's saying, look, forgiveness is an extravagant affair. Can you accept that? So Jesus is not asking us technically to go right now after this Mass and hug your enemy. And I'm going to tell you, please don't do that. What the Lord is asking us to do is, first, can you accept the concept? Can you in principle accept first that you have been forgiven? Because many people have not been able to accept it. The confession is the proof of it. People coming back and saying, Father, you know, the sins of my youth, Father, when I was young, and I tell them, you have been forgiven. And the fact that we've been forgiven, that God can forgive us, is so hard for people to accept. You see, unless you accept it, you cannot accept the love of God. Because the love of God is inclusive of forgiveness. Accept it today that God has forgiven you. And that is done not because you go to a wall and talk to Jesus in a wall, but because you come to a confessional. I am not diminishing the sacramental role of the confessional. Once done here, you have opened your life to the Lord. But I said something, and with this I want to end. I'm not asking you at the end of this homily to run to your enemy who you have forgiven 432 times or whatever you've done, and generously done, and run into their arms only to have them stab you for the 440th time. Don't do that. You'll say, Father, are you contradicting yourself? No. I'm asking you first to understand the love of God, accept it, and live it to the measure you can. But I also want to caution you that forgiveness is for us. God asks us to forgive so that we may be healed, that we may find peace. That is the reason why you forgive. There are people in this world who will take advantage of the fact of who you are. And forgiveness, while is an internal thing and can be manifested by an external action where you know the other person is also open to forgiveness and you can make up. But in some cases, there are people who will stab you right back again. I'm asking you to protect yourself. Yeah, I'm not one of those priests who will throw you right into a bad situation for you to be hurt all over again. I'm one of those priests who always seek to understand the principal message of God. That first we understand His love and His forgiveness, and then we practice it in our lives. Push ourselves, but protect yourself. Because there are people who can, without conscience, destroy you all over again. And you are not obligated. You are obligated to forgive them. Understand what I'm saying? Don't misunderstand my words. You are obligated to forgive your brother from your heart. The words of Jesus cannot be changed. But should you go back and get stabbed all over again? Forgive so that you find peace. Forgive so that when you talk about the person, you are not angry and bitter. Forgive so that when you even think of the person, your mind is not filled with irritation and anger. Forgive. But should you be so vulnerable that you are taken advantage of? My very practical advice, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, is no. Is no. Understand the nature of forgiveness. It begins in our heart. It is meant for our hearts. It is meant to be practiced. And I can forgive you from a distance. So, I don't want you to feel at the end of this homily very often that you are being beaten up from the pulpit, that you have not forgiven enough. I want you to understand this. First, the nature. God forgives me to an extent I can never repay Him, so that I may forgive others, that I may find peace, and that I may do the right thing always in life. Amen.